Good morning and welcome to Victims' Rights Ohio Strong, a celebration of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, the Model of Justice program in the Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center's 20th anniversary. Thank you for joining us today. As a survivor, I have firsthand experience with how victims' rights play out in the criminal justice system. It works for some and has failed others. In Ohio, it is always our goal to seek justice, ensure rights, and inspire hope. We have quite a program planned for you today, so let's get started. Our first panel features two incredible leaders in the victim rights space, John Walsh and Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. Each will share their journeys, why they do what they do, and touch on available services and resources. After an unspeakable tragedy, our first guest and his wife founded the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He is also the founder and host of both America's Most Wanted and The Hunt. And his current project is titled In Pursuit with John Walsh. John, welcome. We have a lot of younger advocates and justice system officials joining us today. Some aren't familiar with the tragedy that you and your family endured. Would you mind sharing?
Nope, no problem, Sophia. Thank you for the nice introduction. And I just want to commend AG Dave Yost for putting this together and being part of it today. And of course, Kathy Lee Harper, who was instrumental in getting me on this wonderful journey today. She was a victim when she was very young by a guy I profiled on America's Most Wanted. And he was caught because of the show. And she became a tremendous advocate for victims' rights in Ohio and has been involved in legislation for all these years. So, and she was initiated the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center. So this young lady has done a lot. And I know, just like you, Sophia, you're a survivor. That's what I call them. I don't call them victims. You and Kathy Lee are loud voices for very strong women survivors. So I commend you, and I'm honored to be here today. And I'll try to take you back a little bit. In 1981, I was a partner in a hotel development company. I thought I had the American dream. I had three partners. We were building our biggest project ever. We built deluxe hotels, and we were building a $26 million hotel on Paradise Island. I lived in Little Hollywood, Florida, and I was married and am still married to the same beautiful woman, my wife, Hervé. Matter of fact, next month we'll have been married 50 years. But I was pursuing and thought I had the American dream. I had the wonderful job, beautiful project, wonderful wife, and a beautiful little boy that we had waited a long time when we first got married to make sure we were good parents. And then we had Adam, and I named Adam after my dad, who was a World War II war hero. So we had 6-year-old Adam Walsh, and I kissed him goodbye on July 27th and went to work. I was on my way to Miami to fly over to the Bahamas, and kissed him goodbye and never saw him again. And my wife took him to the mall, the Hollywood Mall, to the Sears store that day. And she had picked him up from school. She brought him to school every day, picked him up every day. Just a wonderful mom. She was so protective. She wouldn't let him ride his bike out in the road. He had to ride on the sidewalk. He was 6.5, stretching his wings. But they went inside of the Sears store in Hollywood to pick up a lamp. And video games were brand new in 1981. July 27th was a video game set up in the Sears toy department. And they stopped there, and Adam was watching the video game. There were two black boys playing two boys from Argentina. And they were all about 12 years old, 12 or 13 years old. And Adam was watching them, and he asked his mother if he could stay there and watch them. We called him the little gentleman because he had very good manners, very nice manners. And she said, I'll be just right over there. I can see you from, I'll be across the aisle over there paying for this lamp. And she got out her credit card and started to pay for the lamp and turned around to look, and nobody was there. The boys were gone, Adam including. So we never knew what happened for 27 years. The Hollywood police kept the files closed. I kept trying to get the files. FBI warned me that mistakes were made by the Hollywood police, et cetera, et cetera. But after 27 years, a brand new young chief at the Hollywood Police Department said, I know you've been trying to open these files because private citizens can't look at unsolved homicides, capital murder cases. So we were never able to look at those files to see what the Hollywood police did or didn't do. But this young chief, Chad Wagner, said, John, you're a big supporter of law enforcement. I've got 3 guys working here at the Hollywood Police Department that were trained at your National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're in my sex crimes unit. We owe it to you to give you the files. He said, I may lose my job, but I'm going to give you the files. And what we didn't know was that a untrained security guard 27 years ago on that fateful day, she had had an abortion the day before. She was 17 years old, and Sears refused to pay full-time benefits, health insurance, et cetera. So they had all part-time security. She came upon the boys arguing. And in the matter of 2 minutes, she ordered the black boys out one door and the white boys, thinking Adam was with the 2 boys from Argentina, she ordered the white boys out the garden door. And that put Adam out on the streets by himself. And that day, a serial killer named Otis Toole, who had roamed this country kidnapping boys, he had a preference for little boys around 6 years old, hit the lottery. There was a little boy ordered out of the store crying outside, and he grabbed Adam. And we never knew that until the files were open. The head of the security department at Sears told that girl not to tell the Hollywood police or anybody that she had ordered Adam out of the store in case of a lawsuit. So we never knew till 27 years later what went down that day. And when I got the files, I turned the files over to a very wonderful retired homicide detective by the name of Joe Matthews, who teaches cops all over the world how to conduct homicides, and a former prosecutor named Kelly Hancock in Broward County, who was undefeated in death penalty cases. And the 2 of them solved Adam's case in 1 month. It took us 27 years to get the files. And this wonderful young chief gave us the files. He didn't lose his job. People commended him for doing the right thing. We found all the mistakes and all the cover-ups by that detective that had Adam's case, and the chief, who was an alcoholic and has died since then. We found all the mistakes, and they solved Adam's case in 1 month. And they found that security guard, et cetera. So the DA's office and the Hollywood police apologized to us in a live press conference that huge mistakes were made. They had lost important evidence. They had Otis Toole in custody in 1984 and let him go because they lost evidence, although he confessed Adam's murder. So it was a long, torturous journey. But during those 2 weeks that Adam was missing, at the end of 14 days, they found his severed head. Otis Toole had decapitated him, and they found Adam's head floating in a canal in Hollywood, Florida. And that began our journey. That was the battle that I started to wage and my wife started to wage. During the 2 weeks that Adam was missing, the FBI refused to get involved in Adam's case. Matter of fact, I stayed in the Hollywood Police Department and camped in the conference room and only went home 3 times in 2 weeks to take a shower. I ran the search from the Hollywood Police Department, used my ad agency to produce the first ever missing child poster, distribute it with airlines all over South Florida. We did things that had never been done, my partners and I, because the Hollywood police had never had a missing child case, had no clue what they were doing. A lot of those cops were good cops and had children, but they had never searched for a missing child. They didn't even organize the search the day that he was missing. So it was just one debacle after another. And in about 5 days into the search, 5 days into the search, the FBI showed up in Little Hollywood. They drove north. Hollywood's north of Miami. They came into the Hollywood Police Department, and the captain in charge of my search brought me over to meet them. And I said, "Where the hell have you been? You're the FBI. These guys have never, ever had a case of a missing child, a stranger abduction, and I need your help. And they said, oh, no, Mr. Walsh, we're making our laboratory available at Quantico to the Hollywood police, but we don't get involved in kids' issues. These are dirty issues. Most of the kids are runaways. A lot of them are non-custodial parental abductions. And I said, Adam's 6 years old, that he doesn't fit any of those categories. I know for a fact that the FBI was formed because of the Lindbergh kidnapping. And they said, well, we don't do that stuff. We're not involved in any children's issues, but we'll monitor the case. And I said, what if Adam's in another state? What if he's in another county? And they went, nope, sorry. J. Edgar Hoover policy. We only deal with white collar crime and mafia. And I went, wait a second, we need your help desperately. And they said, nope, sorry, we don't get involved. So a couple days later, the coroner of Broward County called me, Dr. Ronald Wright. He was a lawyer. He did Elvis's autopsy. And he said to me, look, the media has hardly covered your son's case. I said, well, I've called ABC, CBS, and NBC. Back in 1981, there were only 3 networks, no 1,000 network universe, streaming television. And they all turned me down. And he said, look, double the reward, you'll get the media back there. They've lost interest in your case. You need television. You need the media to look for Adam. And he said, have you called every coroner? And I said, what do you mean call every coroner? He said, well, you know, John, there's a piece of legislation before the United States Senate and House called the Missing Children's Bill. And that would mandate that every parent have the right to put their child in the NCIC. He said, I checked today and Adam's not in the NCIC. So first of all, you've got to badger your cops to put him in the NCIC. And I said, whoa, what is the NCIC? Oh, it's the National Crime Information Computer. It holds stolen boats, stolen planes, stolen cars, and a racehorse, but no missing children and no unidentified dead file. Adam could be dead in any county in Florida or in anywhere in the United States. And I'm going, you're kidding. He says, well, in Florida, we exchange information corner to corner on a voluntary basis, John, every 6 months by mail. So if Adam is dead somewhere and his body's in that morgue, he might get buried in a John Doe grave. I said, what does that mean? And he said, a John Doe grave is where we don't know the person. He said, I have 4 girls up here in Broward County morgue that were murdered by Johns. And I said, what's a John? And he said, well, they're people that pay for sex with children and prostitutes. And he said, you know, Fort Lauderdale's the runaway capital of the East Coast. So we have lots of boys and girls that run away here to Fort Lauderdale. They're too young to work anywhere. So they sell their bodies, pimps get a hold of them, or they sell drugs. So these girls have been murdered. I'm not going to bury them. Florida law says they have to be buried. I'm not going to bury them because there's got to be a grandmother or a brother or sister who are looking for these little girls. They probably ran away from physical or sexual abuse at home, hit the streets in Lauderdale, and a pimp got a hold of him. He said, but I'm not burying him. Somebody's looking for these girls. So we need to call every corner. I went, I can access the Hong Kong stock market from my office in 5 minutes. And you're telling me the father of a murdered child has to get together with a coroner I don't know and call coroners throughout the state of Florida in case my son's body's in one of those morgues. He said, yep. And he said, have you looked at the booking photos there of pedophiles? And I went, what's a pedophile? And he said, nobody showed me any booking photos. He said, ask those detectives to show you, because a pedophile is someone who prefers sex with children, little boy, little girl. Maybe one of those guys worked on your lawn, worked on your house. Maybe you'll be able to identify it. And I said, why haven't they showed me that booking photos yet? He said, I don't know why. Ask them. So I raised the reward. We got the media there. I looked at the booking photos and I said, why haven't you showed me these pedophiles? They said, well, it slipped our mind, but look and see if any of these guys brushed your pool or put carpet in your house or whatever. He says, they're literally in Broward County. We've arrested maybe 10,000 pedophiles in the last 5 years. And we looked at the book before he showed it to you, and 5 of them live within a mile of your house. And I said, why doesn't anybody know this? And he said, well, there's no sex offender registry. Most of these guys are on parole or probation violation. They give us a bad address, but look and see if you know any of these guys. But anyway, I could go on and on about all the mistakes. Adam's severed head was found the morning we talked our way onto Good Morning America. We flew to New York. We're absolutely convinced we were going to find Adam, but we didn't. So on the 14th day of the search, they found Adam's remains in a canal, his severed head in Florida. We flew home. My wife had, that following week, the post office delivered 40,000, they guesstimated about 40,000 pieces of mail to our garage, filled our garage. I was trying to work, trying to get my hotel open, can't work. I lost 30 pounds, broken heart, both my wife and I, but she was answering every one of those letters. Well, I was trying to figure out how to find who killed Adam and get him killed. That's what men do. That was my bizarre thinking. But she answered every letter, opened every letter, and there were letters from all kinds of condolences and mass cards and all kinds of wonderful letters. But there were thousands of letters from people who saw Adam's search, saw us on Good Morning America and said, I have a runaway child. I have a missing child. My ex-husband took my child. My ex-wife took my child. My child, I don't know what happened to my child. Please help us. How did you get such a big search going? So that's how the National Center started. I started my battle with the FBI, who opposed the Missing Children's Bill. It was a simple one piece of legislation that mandated parents have the right to get into the NCIC with the stolen boats, planes, cars, and a racehorse. After several months, me going to Washington to testify, the Missing Children's Bill was passed. Ronald Reagan had Reve and I and our brand new daughter, Megan, who was born a year after Adam was murdered, in the Rose Garden. We became friends. We got the Missing Children's Assistance Bill passed, created the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Washington. That was, my wife was the quarterback of that. And off we were to the races. And I quit my company. I couldn't work anymore. And I started to try to change laws full time and to get the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children open. It now exists in Washington in a 7-story building. We have 350 people work there, trained cops from all over the world, have a hotline for missing children, cyber tip line, foster child runaways. We do a ton of things, free safety programs. We have 5 brochures, but I could go on, and it's a long story. It's a 30+ year story. But in 1988, America's Most Wanted, Fox came to me, brand new network, only had one night, Sunday night, one show, Johnny Depp in 21 Jump Street. No one had ever heard of Johnny Depp, and asked me if I wanted to be the host of the first reality television program. And it was modeled after Crime Watch UK, which was the BBC partnership with Scotland Yard in London, and they did recreations of criminals. I said no for 6 months. I didn't know anything about television. They said, we want to call it America's Most Wanted. I thought it over, talked to my wife. We had received several threats from different pedophile groups. The police were after a group called NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, whose slogan was sex before 8 or it's too late. They threatened to kill Megan, to kill Reve and I. So we had to move 2 times. I went to a safe house. Anyway, it was a nightmare. And I said, no, I don't want to do the show. Then Fox never stopped asking me. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I want the show to be in Washington, D.C., because our center is there. The FBI is there. By then, the FBI and I had buried our hatchets and we're working together. I want to pick the cases myself. No victims' faces be shown. Never a child's face be shown. I run the hotline. My operators answer the phone, not the cops. Cops should be there when the phones ring, but my people answer the phones. We don't trace or tap. I'm going to tell the American public, if you've seen this horrible guy or this missing child, call me. I don't need to know your name. Don't need to know where you are. Just tell me where that dirtbag is and I'll find him. I'll never forget the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Everybody said the show will be a failure. For first fugitive I picked was David James Roberts. He'd raped 27 women. He had murdered 4 people while he was out on parole, 2 of them small children. He was at the top of the FBI's 10 most wanted. They'd been looking for him for 2 years, not one clue. I featured him on the first America's Most Wanted. We caught him 3 days later, and guess where this sociopath who'd escaped from prison murdered children, killed people. Guess where he was hiding when we caught him? He was running a shelter for the homeless on Staten Island. The
And
FBI
that is incredible.
So then we were off to the races, and I 25 years, America's Most Wanted was the #1 show. We caught 1,422 fugitives in 45 countries around the world, recovered 61 missing children, stranger abducted children alive, caught 17 guys off the FBI's 10 Most Wanted. I tried to retire. FBI and marshals asked me to come out of retirement. So now I have a new show called In Pursuit on ID. It's been on 2 years. We caught 14 guys and it's been a hit. So that's where I am. I know it's a long story, but a lot of people watching probably are too young to remember Adam and all that we went through.
Oh, geez, John, thank you so much for sharing your story and the founding of your organization. You know, as a mother, I can certainly understand how scary it must have been to go through all of those experiences. And what I enjoy hearing about the founding is that the intersection of local government, state government, the federal government, how much work it takes to make sure that victims' rights are heard. You know, Executive Director Kathy Harper Lee tells us that if it wasn't for all that you and your family, John, that you've done, she wouldn't have founded the Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, and her offender would most likely still be sexually assaulting children. 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of the organization, formerly known as the Ohio Justice League. Let's watch a short video on how the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center got started.
Kathy Harper Lee was a victim of violent crime, and although she never had her day in court, she worked hard to ensure that other victims did. Kathy has taken her experiences, along with a great deal of state and national research, and created the Justice League.
I spent the past 13 years building to this precise moment to launch an initiative recognizing the need within our justice system for an organization to help ensure that the constitutional, statutory, and inherent rights of victims of violent crime are upheld throughout the criminal justice process. We're asking for your help today to take this initiative to the next level, to make this a true reality in Ohio. First in Ohio, and then by taking it to other states.
Because there's going to be some woman, some child, some man, some teenager down the road that the Justice League is going to touch, will make such a difference and such an impact in their life. And because this organization exists, they will have a voice to try to rectify a wrong that is double. Wrong not only by the person that victimized them, but wronged again by the system that ignores their needs.
As long as we never forget that the justice system is here to serve all of us, not just the criminal defendant, but most importantly, you and I. As long as we continue to do what we're doing today, we will not fail.
And so I thank you each, every one of you that has taken time, effort to make this a reality, a dream from one woman who has fought for this and fought for this and fought for this. And I've watched her struggle and go out and talk to people and never give up, even when she was financially terribly destitute and should go out and just get a regular job. She said, Eve, I'm going to hang in there because I believe in this. And because of this woman, we're going to have an organization that can have the potential to impact thousands of lives and make a difference in their lives.
John, what's your reaction to Kathy's remarks?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm just having met her and done her case on America's Most Wanted and caught, although the statute of limitations had run out for her case, but caught the dirtbag that molested her and 15 other young girls, little girls that we know of. I was absolutely amazed at her courage and her determination that even though she never got justice for King Curley, that's the dirtbag's name, that molested her, she was going to work to change things for victims. And when you're a crime victim like Kathy and I are, you're angry, you're heartbroken, but the way that you move forward is to decide to do something positive. And look at the legacy that Kathy Lee has with the Ohio Crime Victims Justice League. It's just Justice Center. It's just amazing. She was just determined that she was going to abolish statute of limitations wherever they were. I mean, think about this. You're a 6-year-old girl, you get molested, and the statute of limitations on your crime is 6 years. So you don't come to deal with it till you're 12. What does a 12-year-old girl do? How does she do it? Call the police? Tell somebody? What? I mean, it's insane. But she has changed so many laws. And that's the first thing I learned, that America is a little country, is a big country of 50 little countries. Every state has its different laws. 80% of crimes against American citizens are prosecuted under the state legislatures. Federal law only encompasses 20%. So her job over the years was to make people aware of the plight of victims, how unjust the criminal justice system was for victims, and my hat's off to her.
Yes, absolutely. Kathy truly is a phenomenally strong woman, and we're so appreciative of everything that she's done to advocate for victims and build an organization that does exactly that. You know, Ohio is strong with services and resources for crime victims, and many are supported by Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost Crime Victim Services Section. Elected in January 2019 as Ohio's 51st Attorney General, Dave Yost began his public career as Delaware County's auditor and prosecutor. He has previously held office as Ohio's 32nd Auditor of State. He is well known for rooting out fraud, holding the corrupt accountable, and reforming government. He now pursues his mission to protect the unprotected as Ohio Attorney General. General Yost, so often it seems that the justice system loses track of the humanity attached to any given case. How do we get realignment to shift the focus back to victims instead of the process and/or the caseload?
So realignment suggests that we could just fix it and everything would be fine. And I don't think that's true. I think that this is going to require generation after generation of John Walsh's and Kathy Harper Lee's, because the way our system is designed to get justice, it tends toward the impersonal. Look, when the indictment comes down from a grand jury, it's not the victim versus the dirtbag. It's the state of Ohio versus the dirtbag. And the prosecutor is going to have multiple cases. So the system is designed to be thinking about the offenses against society. The system is designed to do due process, make sure that we get a result that is supported by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And somehow, unless there are strong, strident voices that say these are people, the survivors need to be part of this process, it's going to trend away from the person, away from the actual act, and toward the process. So, John, we can't in America thank you enough for your legacy. I've never heard you, I've known Adam's story, but I've never heard you tell it. And I have to tell you, I was moved listening to it. But what you've done, the ripple effects of other people like Kathy, I'm just so much in debt to you, and our society is. But it's going to take a renewed effort that we continue to focus on. Justice happens one life at a time, one person at a time. I hate the term justice system because it misses the fact that there's no way to get systemic justice unless you're doing it one case, one file, one survivor at a time.
I love that. Can you share with us what Ohio is doing to protect crime victims?
Sure. So Ohio is one of the states that added MARSY'S law to its constitution. Prior to that, we did have a Victims' Bill of Rights in our statute, and MARSY'S law enshrined that in the Constitution. My office funds victims advocates in law enforcement agencies and prosecutors' offices across the state. And that is so critical. Probably the most formative experience of my life in law enforcement has been actually sitting with the survivors of crime. One of the first cases I did was a aggravated murder case. A guy's still on death row all these years later, but he killed his wife. And I remember sitting with this woman's daughters and listening to their stories and seeing their anger and their heartbreak and seeing them deal with depression and emptiness and how much they needed to get closure and justice. And I think about Jennifer and Lori and Carrie almost every day from that experience. And it's a completely different way of thinking about doing the work of criminal justice.
Absolutely, one person at a time. John, Attorney General Yost, thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation about victim rights. Ohio crime victim rights booklets are available through the AG's office at no cost and can be ordered at ohioattorneygeneral.gov/victim. Thank you so much. Today's event highlights the multitude of individuals and organizations fighting for victims' rights and joining the movement to ensure those rights are enforced and the voices of victims are heard. I am no different. As I mentioned earlier, I am a survivor of sexual assault. As a woman, and more specifically as a Black woman, I believe one of the most challenging stories to tell is our own. I can only speak from my experience as an American, but if you are a Black woman living in America, we are all too familiar with the institutional injustices Black women have experienced with regard to sexual assault and violence throughout history. From the story of Reese Taylor, who was raped by 6 white men in rural Alabama in the 1940s and not believed, to the story of Rhea Milton and Dominique Remy Fells, 2 Black trans women who were viciously murdered earlier this month. Black women are far too often the forgotten survivors of sexual assault and violent crimes. Yet, as women of color, we boldly champion the adversities of others by fearlessly speaking up for our community's needs. We take on issues head first. We volunteer our time. We delicately share the stories of others because we are relentless defenders of truth. However, with our own story, we often fail to be bold, fearless, and relentless advocates of our own truth because there is a system that places the rights in the hands of the accused versus in the hands of the assaulted. I was raped by a white male 15 years ago. I reported that I was raped. However, despite evidence showing his sperm was inside me, and my rapist denying ever touching me, the detectives told me he was innocent and called me a liar. And at that moment, I recall feeling powerless and worrying, what's the point of crying for help? Because as a Black woman, society will always value his words over mine. I could use a series of slogans, hashtag Black Lives Matters, hashtag Me Too, hashtag Time's Up, to find allies in a movement for justice. But the point of today's conversation is to unequivocally say that our rights matter, that victims' rights matter, and it's time for change. I had rights, and they were not enforced. Had I known that just a few years earlier, an organization had been formed to help individuals like me understand my rights, the trajectory of my case and my life would have taken a completely different path. So I'm here today to shine a light on victims. I'm here to ask you to join me in this movement, to use your voice, to volunteer your time, give resources, and build awareness around this movement that the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center has created to help individuals like me. Now, we will hear presentations from some very powerful women who will share the latest on enforceable rights for crime victims. First, we'll hear from MARSY'S Law Policy Counsel Keely Broom. During her time at MARSY'S Law, Keely has worked on legislative and campaign efforts to help qualify victims' rights state constitutional amendments, otherwise known as MARSY'S Law, for the ballot in several states. She has also collaborated with local elected officials, advocates, and other stakeholders to help achieve successful elimination of MARSY'S Law in states where these amendments have already passed, including Ohio, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Nevada, Florida, Georgia, and most recently, Wisconsin. Now let's hear the latest on MARSY'S Law. Keely?
Hey there, I'm Keely Broom, Policy Counsel for MARSY'S Law for All. I'm so thankful to participate today, and I do have a short presentation, so if you'll bear with me, I'll pull that up now so you can follow along. And just by way of brief background for those who are unfamiliar, we are a national nonprofit that is driving really a new wave of state constitutional protections that seek to protect crime victims' participatory rights in the criminal justice process. And although these amendments are different from state to state, there are some core elements that are the same pretty much across the board. And those are that victims have specific enumerated constitutional rights, that they have the right to be informed of those rights, and that they have the right to enforce those rights. So since 2008, we've passed by substantial percentages in the 14 states you see highlighted in purple here. California was the first in 2008. And I do want to brag on Ohio a little bit, because when we passed in Ohio in 2017, it was with a whopping 82% of the vote, which is pretty epic, and one of the biggest, if not the biggest, I think, victories that we've had to date. So a lot to be proud of in Ohio. One other quick note, you do see Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Montana highlighted in purple here. We did pass in those states, but unfortunately have not yet gone into effect there. And that's due to some technical legal challenges as to the process by which we were put on the ballot in those states. So not, again, I want to emphasize, these were not challenges as to the substance of MARSY'S Law, but instead were really technical in nature. Some more recent good news, though, in mid-April of this year, we passed in Wisconsin with a pretty substantial percentage of, I think, nearly 75%. So this is just one of the local headlines, but this was a really big victory for us. And this, of course, means that crime victims in Wisconsin now have meaningful, fully enforceable state constitutional protections. And I'll move on now to some successes in the courtroom. This one in particular is a more recent decision out of the Northwestern Judicial District in Ohio. And this one dealt specifically with the victim's right to refuse an interview or other discovery request from the accused. And this language is not unique to North Dakota. There is similar language in most versions of MARSY'S Law. But in this particular case, The defendant is charged with both murder and attempted murder, and the surviving victim refused to submit to a deposition on grounds that under MARSY'S law, he didn't have to. And the defendant challenged that and argued that the victim's refusal to submit to the deposition violated his Sixth Amendment Confrontation Clause right. Ultimately, the judge in this case sided with the victim, and in keeping with a long line of case law, including U.S. Supreme Court precedent, held that the defendant's Confrontation Clause right doesn't attach pretrial, it attaches at trial. So certainly this is a favorable MARSY'S law specific decision that we're grateful to have in our arsenal. This next one deals with victim presence in the courtroom. This is a California decision from 2013. And in this case, a minor defendant was charged with assaulting another minor with a deadly weapon. And what was at issue was whether or not the trial court abused its discretion in allowing the minor victim's mother to stay in the courtroom. And on appeal, the appellate court held that the juvenile court did not abuse its discretion in allowing the mother to remain through the duration of the trial proceedings. And in reaching that decision, one of the very first observations that the court makes is that MARSY'S law specifically gives the victim the right to remain present in the courtroom. This next one is another California decision. This one's a little bit more recent, from 2015, and this one deals with restitution. And in this particular case, the trial court had sentenced the defendant to more than 5 years in state prison after he pled guilty to second-degree burglary. And the court also ordered the defendant to pay direct restitution to the victim. But the court suspended execution of the sentence and instead committed the defendant to a rehabilitation center. And after the defendant served the requisite time at the rehabilitation center, the court dismissed the charges against him. And then when the defendant received a notice that he needed to still pay restitution to the victim, he challenged that and argued that because the charges had been dismissed, that he was relieved of his responsibility to pay restitution. The appellate court, of course, disagreed with that and said dismissal of those criminal charges did not release him from the obligation to pay restitution. And in reaching its decision, the court looked specifically at MARSY'S law and said, Constitution guarantees a right to restitution, and that right can't be bargained away, it can't be limited, it can't be waived by the prosecution. I did not go over any Ohio case law. That's because I know we have Ohio experts on the panel today, so I'll leave that to them. Again, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to taking your questions a little later.
We're so thankful for everything that MARSY'S Law is doing on a national stage. And today, I'd also like to take a look at what we're doing here in Ohio. Joining us next is Crime Victim Justice Center Legal Director Elizabeth Well. Elizabeth will review the legal services the organization provides to crime victims for free, while enjoying incredible success protecting victims' rights over the past 20 years. Additionally, Elizabeth will also discuss the importance of meaningful, enforceable rights for crime victims, Senate Bill 610, and how the organization has continued to protect crime victims and their rights during the COVID-19 pandemic. Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Elizabeth Well, and I'm the Legal Director at Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center. For the past 20 years, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center has been providing free legal representation to victims of crime during the criminal justice process to ensure that their rights are enforced and protected. And we've also been providing free training to criminal justice system officials and allied professionals for the past 20 years as well. In 2017, as Keely shared, Ohio voters sent a pretty unequivocal message crime victims' rights are crucial and should be respected in the criminal justice process. This was in the constitutional amendment for crime victims known as MARSY'S Law. MARSY'S Law provided victims with some new rights, and it also enshrined many existing rights into the Ohio Constitution. New rights include the right to full and timely restitution, expanded rights of the victim to be heard by our trial courts, as well as explicit standing to enforce their rights, and the ability to do so through counsel. Since the passage of MARSY'S Law nearly 3 years ago now, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center has been working hard on 3 separate initiatives: representation, training, and legislation. In terms of representation, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center has continued for 20 years to provide services and representation to victims in our trial courts. But in addition, since the passage of MARSY'S Law, we have litigated numerous cases for our clients in our appellate courts, and most recently, the Ohio Supreme Court. A couple of examples of our appellate court litigation include 2 recent victories for our clients, where appellate courts in Ohio held that trial courts may not dismiss victim requests for restitution and must award victims full and timely restitution for the losses that victims have endured financially as a result of crimes. One Ohio appellate court also held that a trial court judge acts outside of his jurisdiction and outside of his judicial power when he attempts to allow a criminal defendant to access, search, and photograph a crime victim's home during a criminal case. And most recently, within the past couple of weeks, we're very pleased to announce that we had another victory for one of our clients, in which the appeals court held that a trial court acts outside of his judicial power when he attempts to restore firearms rights that are federally limited. And in this case, the defendant was prevented from accessing firearms after a conviction for domestic violence. We're also litigating 2 important privacy matters in the Ohio Supreme Court, one related to victim privacy rights in public records, the other related to victim privacy rights in their home when a trial court attempts to allow a defendant to access a victim home to search and photograph as a part of the criminal case. In terms of training, since the passage of MARSY'S Law, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center has seen our training requests explode, about 750% more training requests than prior to the passage of MARSY'S Law. In the past 2 years, we've trained 5,000 criminal justice system officials and allied professionals. And COVID-19 has not slowed us down. We have actually, in the past couple of months, participated in 2 national trainings, which trained about 850 people in total, which we're very proud of. And we will continue these efforts and have many trainings available later in the year. As I said, COVID-19 has not slowed us down. We have continued to do this important work and actually looked for ways to innovate and allow victims to continue to be notified of releases of offenders, to continue to be notified, present, and heard at criminal justice system hearings, and to allow victims to exercise the right to be present in a way that doesn't interfere with their right to be safe and healthy, like allowing them to attend via video conference and telecommunications as well. As Keely shared, House Bill 610 has recently been introduced in the Ohio House of Representatives, and this bill is designed to provide implementation guidance to criminal justice system officials on how to implement and protect the constitutional promises of MARSY'S Law. Perhaps most critically, House Bill 610 provides victims with 2 avenues for appellate review when their rights are violated at the trial court. As I said, we're litigating many rights in the appeals courts and Supreme Court, and it's very important that we are able to continue to do that so that we can set case law that will benefit all Ohio victims. And if you want to learn more about victims' rights outside of what I've shared in this very short 5 minutes, you can visit www.victimsrightstoolkit.org, where all of Ohio's state and federal laws that provide rights and impact crime victims are organized chronologically by phase of the process and designed to help victims learn about and exercise their rights, and to provide information to criminal justice system officials and allied professionals as well. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, Thank you so much. It is incredible the amount of work that the organization is accomplishing every single year, especially in a year like 2020. You know, in a non-pandemic year, the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center would be holding their annual Models of Justice Awards program, recognizing heroes throughout the state and the justice system who go above and beyond to protect victims' rights. We will now reveal our first award, the Joanne Aubrey Special Courage Award, which goes to Mary Seawright. Mary is a fighter. She fights for what she believes in, and that's why she's allowed a man who she met at church to use her property for what he told her would be a prison ministry. Instead, that man broke into MARSY'S office, damaging her property, stealing her possessions, and abusing her trust. Mary reported the crimes and fought to exercise her rights as a victim. She collected all of the receipts and invoices from her stolen property and damage and provided them to the prosecutor's office so she could obtain the full and timely restitution that is guaranteed by the Ohio Constitution. She attended the sentencing hearing and spoke out about the harm caused by the defendant's crimes. Although the judge had copies of everything supporting her right to restitution, the court did not order the defendant to pay Mary back. Mary contacted the Justice Center for help. The Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center filed an action in the appeals court to reopen sentencing to ensure Mary received the restitution she was constitutionally promised. The defendant fought the case. Through multiple actions filed by the defendant designed to delay Mary's case and deny her right to restitution, Mary's case went back and forth from the appeals court to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the appeals court ruled in Mary's favor and ordered the trial court to reopen the sentencing, consider Mary's evidence, and make the defendant pay her back. Throughout the entire case, Mary never lost either her fighting spirit or her belief that she would prevail. Mary Seawright is truly a model of justice. Let's hear from her now.
In a Birmingham jail in 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." As a crime victim, I was denied restitution, and that was an injustice against me. This man came to me as someone who was working to help inmates better their lives, and I was so involved in helping. One of the things that he took from me was a gun that my husband gave to me. In court, I felt awful when the judge said that he denied me restitution. After I'd already been victimized, I was victimized 2 times. And I'm telling you, after all of that, it wasn't that a slap in the face. After leaving the courtroom, I was so angry. I said, I'm not going to let it go. And I'm going to fight it. I'm fighting for my rights. I'm fighting for every old woman. I'm 74 years old. When I heard about the Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, I was absolutely thrilled. There was nothing I could have done if I had not heard about this organization. I wouldn't have had a chance to win. You know, you need someone who knows what to do, how to do, and willing to do. I was so thankful to know that there was dedicated attorneys and these brilliant-minded women fighting for people's rights who could not afford an attorney, who are willing to fight side by side with you. I could never have afforded this service. When you walk into a courtroom, you don't have to walk out with your head down, feeling that you've been beat up and you have no right. I am so thankful for this organization. We should have more. Thank God we have this one in Ohio. This is why I am honored to accept the Model of Justice Special Courage Award, with the hope that future crime victims' rights won't be violated. Thank you so much.
Mary is absolutely a fighter. And I'm so thankful that she was able to share a little bit about her story and that we were able to give her this award. We felt that it's important for you to hear from not only law enforcement and industry and justice leadership, but also from those whose rights may have been violated, the victims of these crimes. We have a special story to share with you today, one that took place in Delaware County, one that created a wonderful and long-lasting friendship between the victim and her prosecutor and ended with enforceable rights for a crime victim. A 12-year veteran in the Delaware County Prosecutor's Office and her current role as Chief Counsel and Attorney General Dave Yost, she oversees 7 sections focused on law enforcement and criminal justice. The Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, Special Prosecutions, the Ohio Organized Crime Investigations Commission, Healthcare Fraud, and Crime Victims and Criminal Justice. Please welcome Carol O'Brien. And our survivor from a very young ages, Heather and her brother faced years of abuse from their father with no support from their mother. After fleeing multiple times, justice was finally served, but the journey was long and trying. Joining us today to tell her story of survival is social worker and advocate Heather Orr. Heather?
I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share my story in hopes that it inspires those that have been victimized to reach out for help, and also inspires those that are fighting for justice and supporting those who have been abused to find their voice and advocate for their needs. When I thought about how I was going to share my story, I wanted to include lessons that could be shared, which would not only help those who have been abused, but even more so help prevent abuse from occurring. There are 3 lessons that I want to share from my own experiences. Lesson 1, child abuse can happen to anyone. I grew up in a home with both my parents. They had stable employment. They didn't have drug or alcohol addictions. From the outside looking in, we were a normal middle-class family. We went to church regularly. In fact, my dad helped with the youth program at church. I received good grades in school. I was active in Girl Scouts, competed in gymnastics. I was on the cheer team at school. We were surrounded by extended family that was supportive, and we spent time together. Once again, from the outside looking in, it appeared that I had a loving, supportive family. I feel this contributed to so many not believing me and the lack of investigation when I was in 8th grade. This picture-perfect family could not be further from the truth. My earliest memory of abuse is at the age of only 3. I was abused by both my parents physically and emotionally, and sexually by my dad. When I was 10 years old, my brother was born, and my abuse was at its worst. A major point that I want everyone to understand is that I didn't realize I grew up in an abusive household. I thought it was normal. It wasn't until my parents tried to adopt another little girl, and I was told that she was sexually abused, and that's why she was being removed from her home. Finally, I realized what I had been through for the last 13 years. Lesson 2. Children need advocates, education, and support. Unless children are taught about abuse and what is wrong, they will not reach out for help. I needed a support system to protect me, and in that regard, I was failed. In 8th grade, I told a friend's mother, who was a social worker, what happened at home, and she was and still is an amazing support to me. She reported the abuse, and this is where several things went wrong. My parents were questioned before I was, and then they threatened me that if I didn't lie, I would end up in foster care and I would really be abused. I was pulled out of class at school, and I was sent to the principal's office to be questioned. I was interrogated across the principal's desk, and I felt like I was in trouble the entire time. I did not share everything, but I told them just enough that it should have warranted an additional investigation. It was not, and no one in my family was questioned again. My parents were very nervous about getting caught, so they uprooted my brother and I, and we moved to Arizona right before I was supposed to start high school. I was devastated, and it reinforced the idea that if no one was going to help me, then what my dad was doing must be okay. That summer, I was abused regularly, and I felt alone. After that summer, I avoided being home as much as possible. I figured out how I could graduate high school in 3 years by taking just a few extra classes. And at the age of 16, I graduated from high school, left for college, and tried to move on and excel in my studies. But I couldn't. I returned after a year and confronted my dad. I needed to heal. Our first therapy session did not go well, but fortunately, my therapist became my next advocate. My entire life changed in the summer of 2000. Life with my parents was very volatile. My mom would not talk to me. I was not allowed to have contact with my brother. My family accused me of making everything up, and I sunk into depression. My therapist kept me alive and was the one person I could count on. My dad came to my apartment one night with a gun and tried to kill me. In this moment, I knew the only way I was going to survive was by contacting the authorities. I immediately called 911, and 2 policemen came to my apartment. I told them everything. They were very supportive. They told me to get a restraining order and told me to record my dad admitting what he did. I now had 2 more advocates. A few days later, I connected the tape recorder to my phone, and I called my dad. During that phone call, my dad was very careful not to admit to anything that he did in Arizona, but just Ohio. But that was more than enough. I took the tape to a nearby police station. I was so nervous going in, but I was able to tell my entire story to the officer. Once I was done, the officer asked where I lived and informed me that I was at the wrong location and they didn't have jurisdiction. I was confused and defeated. I sat in my car and I cried. I thought no one cares. I did what I was asked to, and no one's still helping. It took me a little while, but I got the courage to go to the other police department. I walked in and was greeted by a very supportive police detective who became another advocate. He questioned me first, then listened to the tape. After the tape, he jumped out of his seat and ran out of the room. He quickly came back and told me they were leaving immediately to pick my dad up. This detective was the first person that protected me, and I finally received the validation of what happened to me was wrong. As the case progressed, I was assigned a victim's advocate, a lawyer, a legal team. I had a lot of people in my corner, but none from my family. Most of my extended family believed my parents when they told them that I was lying. They would frequently call and threaten me. This was one of the hardest things for me. I lost many from my family by standing up for myself and for telling the truth. My family decided to bail my dad out of jail, and he did not show up for his court date in October. He had fled. In January 2001, my mom and brother disappeared. I suspected, and it was later confirmed, that my family helped them join my fugitive dad. It would be 10 years until I heard anything from my missing family. I started receiving emails from my brother, routed through my paternal grandmother. I was excited to finally hear from him, but it worried me. In one of the emails, my brother included a few pictures, and in the corner of one of the photos was a sign that was in German. I suspected they were in Germany, and this confirmed it. It was around the same time that my dad's father was arrested for fraud in Canada, and he was held by Scotland Yard in England. There were several news reports about the case, and I read some of the comments left by people describing how he was finally being brought to justice. I messaged a few people that had left comments, and one of them told me about my grandfather's son and his American wife that were living in Germany, and they were operating a restaurant. He gave me the address, he gave me the names of the restaurant, and I couldn't believe it. Everything that I had been searching for fell in my lap. I have been working with the U.S. Marshal for a few years at this point, and I sent him everything, the photos, their address. He replied that he was getting transferred and would pass along the information. A few months passed with no calls or emails from the U.S. Marshal. I felt defeated again, another person unwilling to help me. Finally, a new U.S. Marshal contacted me. He let me know he was taking over the case and asked if I had any questions. I asked him about everything that I had turned into his predecessor, of which he was completely unaware. Once I resent him everything, he couldn't believe it. I had given him an address, a visual proof of where they were. He became my next advocate. Something was finally going to be done. Once Interpol had apprehended my dad, it took another year to extradite him back to the U.S. It was during this time that I gained a few more advocates, Prosecutor O'Brien and her legal team. Carol O'Brien took the lead to ensure that my dad was brought back to the United States to face justice. I knew someone had my back. They believed, they protected me. Her team supported me through the entire process. I finally got my day in court, and the case ended with my dad found guilty, imprisoned for decades, and a feeling of relief due to the support of many advocates. Even with all the mistakes that were made and the lack of support I had for so many years, I learned to stand up and fight for myself and gain support of many advocates. Lesson 3. No matter the trauma, you can heal and become stronger. I have learned several things: how to protect myself, to not allow toxic people in my life, and that family doesn't have to be blood. There are so many people that have supported me through this healing process. I would not be where I am today without the many advocates that have walked beside me through this journey. Another huge advocate in my life is my husband. He met me right before the trial in Arizona in 2001. I told him everything, and he's supported me through it all. He has been to countless court hearings, supported me through years of therapeutic healing, and we've been able to build a strong family together. By standing up for myself, by being open and vocal, my husband and I have been able to raise 4 strong children. We have educated them on how to keep themselves and others safe by being open and honest. I broke the cycle of abuse. After years of healing, I became the mother I had always wanted and needed. This journey has also led me to reach out to others who are struggling to help themselves and help them learn to stand up for themselves. As a social worker, I hope to strengthen the policies to protect children from abuse, strengthen parents to protect their children, help perpetrators take accountability for their actions and reform, and increase the support and legal rights for victims of sexual assault. When we support and advocate for victims, they become survivors, and they can help bring sexual abuse to light.
So imagine my surprise when in September of 2010, I was golfing with my husband and I received a phone call from the Department of Justice. They informed me that they had just arrested Frank Hertel. Interpol had arrested him. He was being held in Germany on the warrants from Arizona and Ohio. Did we want him extradited back to Ohio? Yes. Would we pay to transport him back to the US? Of course. And then this is where another lesson that Heather had to learn. It's not easy dealing with the federal government and foreign governments. Germany would not release the defendant until it was satisfied that the state had good cause to believe that Frank Hertel committed the crimes of which he was accused. They insisted we prove how we knew he had committed the crimes and how sure were we. Duh, he confessed, and it was on video, so we had pretty concrete proof. They asked us if we would pay the $20,000 in transportation costs from Germany back to the US. Again, we agreed, no problem. Thankfully for us in Delaware County's budget, Pima County, Arizona picked up that cost. They also made us verify, and this was the hardest part, over and over again, 4 or 5 times, that he was not facing life in prison or the death penalty. And as everyone on this call knows, neither of those are sentences, with the exception of one area, and he wasn't charged with rape of a child under 10 by force, not in the initial indictment. It was during this time that I met Heather, and what I noticed immediately and what we found out is that she was and is a tireless and fierce advocate for not only herself, but her children, her family, and now for others. She was so impressive in her determination to make sure that justice was served on her behalf. And after spending time with Heather, I realized the other driving force in her life was her younger brother, KC, who was still with her father and her mother in Germany. And she was worried about his safety and his welfare. When Frank Hertel arrived in the US, he first went to Arizona where he was sentenced to 20 years, and then which took almost another year, and he was transported back to Delaware to face trial. After a year of wrangling with both he and his attorney, the defendant decided he would plead guilty, and in December he pled guilty. At the end of December, he withdrew that plea, and it was scheduled for trial again. We finally were able to get him to plead guilty in March of 2014. And after an extremely impactful victim statement from Heather and her husband, he was sentenced to 19 to 95 years in prison to be served concurrently to his 20 years in Arizona. But honestly, to me, this isn't a story of Frank Hertel, horrific as he was as a person. This is a story of a young girl who, against all odds, battled her family who abused her, her extended family who supported that family who abused her, and the system that failed her. And she has not only survived, but has thrived. My husband last night, who was involved in this case at the very beginning, said, I just don't know how she did it. And honestly, there are times I look at Heather, and I received a graduation card for her oldest daughter, and I don't know how she did it either. And prosecutors don't cry, by the way, but I'm tearing up right now. So you look at a picture of her family and her husband, Daniel, and her 4 children, and that's what a hero does. She took an almost unbearable burden and refused to bend to it. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again and again and again. Heather Orr is a hero. Thank you, Heather.
No, I'm tearing up. Thank you.
Wow, Heather, I couldn't agree more with the hero's definition. And I think what your story, and Carol, what your advocacy on behalf of Heather and her family, it just shows how it takes an entire village of people to help victims and to support victims and to make sure that their rights are and their voices are heard. If you're watching this show today, if you have any questions for our presenters, please feel free to email them. Like too many victims, our next model of justice honoree had to take justice into her own hands. We just heard Heather's story of her father's sexual abuse. Heather's decades-long struggle for justice inspired her to seek ways to shine a light on the vulnerable and exploited. She became a clinical social worker and now works as a therapist for women, children, and veterans who have been subjected to abuse and trauma, connecting them with community care services. She has served as a rape crisis volunteer and community event organizer, and as a military spouse is pursuing further graduate level studies to analyze and improve national policies related to family advocacy programs and support for victims of military sexual trauma. Heather is truly an overcomer, a hero, and a model of justice, and we are thrilled to award her with the Joanne Aubrey Special Courage Award.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this honor. It doesn't seem like I deserve it because I've done what I needed to do to fight for myself and fight for justice. And I couldn't have done any of this without the many advocates and support that I've had through the 20 years that it fought to get there. Thank you.
2019 was a tough year for Dayton. Tornadoes, a KKK rally, and a mass shooting left the community devastated. But with the expertise of our next presenters, Dayton banded together and came back stronger than ever. Cindy Kerr and Sandy Hunt of the Ohio Crisis Response Team join us to discuss the challenges of responding to a mass casualty. Welcome, ladies.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Everybody can hear me? Hi, I'm Cindy. Thank you guys for all joining in today. My name is Cindy Kerr, as mentioned, and Sandy Hunt, my colleague, and I are going to be talking today about how do you respond to a community after a mass casualty event. I'm going to be talking in the first portion about the actual deployment of how local advocacy and crisis response team can provide support to a community who has been struck with such a traumatic event. Sandy is going to be speaking the last portion about the actual event and lay out that event for us, and you can see how those things combined and we work together to try to make sure that the community had the net that it needed during this event. So what I'm going to talk to you about, you see on my first slide, it says traditional victim assistance coupled with community crisis response can assist in community after a traumatic event. And NOVA is the National Organization for Victim Assistance, and they have a community crisis response team model that the Ohio Crisis Response Team utilizes. We've been operational since 1996, and we've responded to events all over the state to be able to use a model that we know we're all identifying with when we go out into that community. Also, to say that traditional victim support, I have the privilege of being able to be a victim specialist and serve as a victim advocate out of BCI. There are different types of responses. There are some photos here of school shootings. You'll see there at a shopping mall, but you will also see the Pulse nightclub, which occurred with our Florida crisis response team, trained under the same model, responding to them as well. And so these are some of the mass casualty responses that are happening. You see address large numbers of people in a short period of time who are just essentially in crisis. But also what occurs is this really incredible thing. And what it is it's this peer validation. What happens during these crisis events is that isolation occurs, and isolation is the enemy. So each and every time we experience these traumatic events, and individuals out in the community and these mass responses they're experiencing a traumatic event feels this almost personal emotional explosion. During that event, we are able to do some validation for individuals who are experiencing those responses, and they can validate for each other. It reduces the isolation because they understand they are not alone in some of their responses. And again, some of those might be unique, but they can understand sitting together in a room why they may not be eating, sleeping, or reacting the way they normally do in their traditional coping skills. You'll see on the next slide, we talk about how to help promote mutual support and to rebuild that sense of community. What happens when the crises like this occur and individuals come together from crisis teams and the victims advocates come together to support? We of course, when I say we as a crisis team come in, and for the advocates come in at the direction and the request of the local individual who's there. And that would be Sandy. We fill the gaps in where she needs. She might need to be in one location while we were helping to greet individuals as they came into the FAC, what we call the FAC, which is the Family Assistance Center. And that was the Dayton Convention Center. So what we were able to do was kind of work with what they needed to do, where they might have needed to be working with one group. We were able to work with another. A family assistance center is set up so that individuals who've experienced this traumatic event and the mass casualty have one place to come to. It's secured by law enforcement, first responders, so that they have the privacy and they're able to come into those locations. And then we as crisis teams can either do group setting intervention debriefings with them, or we can do what's called companioning. Companioning is a very important piece of this. And I said I was going to mention about crisis. I was going to mention about September 11th. September 11th was where companioning was a term that was coined. And what happened at the September 11th Family Assistance Center, there were so many individuals that came through there, but there were so many stations that they might have had to check into that crisis responders were assigned one-on-one to them to navigate and walk through with them, just like a victim assistance professionals do, each of those stations. At the mass casualty event and the Oregon district shootings, the same thing occurred there. Individuals were assigned to crisis responders at the convention center and later at the resiliency center and walked through to the additional resources while those crisis responders were able to do crisis response and intervention with those individuals at the same time. So the group setting coupled with the companioning or the victim assistance is an incredible resource to work together. Again, that promotes this mutual support, trauma bonds. And the one thing I want to say about this is the trauma bonds a community, and that individuals, we found just this great thing in Dayton where so many people came together to support one another, the resources, the businesses, but also public officials, our attorney general, our governor, our support from BCI came to, and other officials came to support the local officials there. So it just provides the opportunity for that net to be available for that community, to affirm and reaffirm hope for the future as well. And that means one of the main things that we want to do is to leave individuals with hope, to help prepare them with hope as they kind of walk out that door. That's the one thing we want in this tragedy, for them to feel hopeful when they leave. So my last slide you see here, there's an immediate response to acute crisis. I'm just going to identify what acute crisis versus chronic crisis. Acute means this sudden, random, arbitrary event of mass casualty, which is what occurred in Dayton, versus chronic, which is an ongoing chronic type event. So what happens is this is a way to integrate trauma into their life. And by doing that, these last 6 points on my slides, what I'm going to say, safety and security. One of the things that we really address with our individuals is we want them to feel safe and secure in the environment that they're in, but we also want them to know they're safe now. Individuals who've experienced trauma may feel this ongoing sense or threat of danger. And so we try very hard as a community crisis response team and as the advocates to provide that safety and security for them. To provide the opportunity for ventilation and validation means we want them to be able to tell their story, to be able to tell what has occurred to them, with them, and how they have experienced it as they experienced it in their lives in their moments. But we want to validate for them. We want to validate for them and predict and prepare. And prediction and preparation means we want to help them what's the unknown, to help guide them and navigate them a little bit. What we hope for at the end of this time period is to say to them, we want to remind individuals that there is not something wrong with you, but that something wrong happened to you, and that we want to support them and provide and navigate for them as they go along and provide support for the community. I've tried to wind up what we do when we go out. I'm going to turn this over to my incredible, amazing colleague, Sandy, to talk about the event laid out so that we can see how that all came together. Sandy, it's on to you. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Cindy. It's truly an honor to have this opportunity to present with you here today. My name is Sandy Hunt, and I'm the director of the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office Victim Witness Division. And before we talk about the mass shooting, I just want to talk a little bit about the historic Oregon District. Those of you that have been there know what a wonderful neighborhood it is. It became a historical district in 1974. It consists of about 12 city blocks, and it has houses, apartments. The main drag is on 5th Street, where there's restaurants, eclectic shops, and of course, the nightlife. There's many bars and nightclubs. It's a fun place, very diverse, an area that's only a few blocks from where I work, an area I frequent often, along with my family and friends. So I want to talk first about the evening of August 3rd. So that night I was getting ready for bed and I was watching the 11 o'clock news, and I heard about a mass shooting in El Paso, Texas. I was heartbroken. I thought about the victims and the survivors, the family, friends who were left behind. So I went ahead and went to sleep after that, and a few hours later my phone rang. It was one of my staff members letting me know that there was a shooting in the Oregon District. At first I wasn't in shock. I wasn't extremely upset because unfortunately we have a lot of shootings in our community. My thought was law enforcement needed us to respond to a scene. My staff said to me, "No, Sandy, you don't understand. There's been a mass shooting in the Oregon District." It still wasn't sinking in, but I told her, get as much information as you can, get back to me with more details. So I turned my television on, and the first thing I saw on the news was a mass shooting in the Oregon District. Multiple people dead, multiple people injured. the reality hit me then. And then all of a sudden I remembered my son, he was in the Oregon district that evening. So of course I had to contact him. I wake him up, and as most kids, he's a grown kid, but he says, "Mom, why are you waking me up?" And I had to tell him I needed to hear your voice. I needed to know you were okay. And he's like, "What happened?" I said, "There was a mass shooting in the Oregon district." And he said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, I was down there that evening. I went to a comedy club. I left at 1 a.m., which you'll learn was a significant time." He told me he started to go to one of the bars on 5th Street, but decided to come home instead. So after I got him situated, I immediately got dressed and got ready to respond. You'll see on the next slide the events that I learned from Dayton Police, the timeline of what happened. So at 11:04 p.m., the assailant, his sister, and a friend arrived in the Oregon district. They exited their vehicle and walked behind Newcomb's, and this is along with his sister and his friends. And Newcomb's is one of the main bars in the Oregon district. So at 12:13 a.m., they went to a bar called Blind Bob's. At this point, the assailant separated from his sister and friend. And all of this was captured on surveillance cameras. At 12:14 a.m., the assailant was seen entering Ned Pepper's, another bar. He stayed there for approximately 30 minutes. At 12:45 p.m., he was seen walking to his vehicle. He changed his clothes and got a backpack. At 1:05 a.m. and 35 seconds, the offender started shooting outside of Blind Bob's. At 1:06 a.m., Dayton Police engaged. At 1:06 and 7 seconds, the officers took down the shooter. 32 seconds. 9 people tragically lost their lives that day, including the assailant's sister. 17 people received gunshot injuries, including the assailant's friend. 19 other people received injuries from falling and/or being trampled. Hundreds of other people would face emotional distress. And these are people we consider being in the zone. So anybody who was within that 12-block radius, who may have witnessed what happened, may have heard something, could have been just citizens walking on the street, patrons visiting bars, restaurants, employees who were working in the district. So on the next slide, you will see when we deal with a mass casualty, there are 3 distinct phases: the response phase, the transitional phase, and the recovery phase. So in the immediate aftermath of the response phase, dozens of Dayton police officers flooded the Oregon district. They were attending to the injured. They went into life-saving mode, placing tourniquets on those who had severe bleeding. They were placing others into their vehicles and driving them to the hospital. So on the next slide, you will see how the response phase unfolded. So the Dayton Convention Center, which is located on 5th Street, which is only a couple of blocks from the Oregon district, became the gathering place for different agencies to set up to provide resources and information. Victims, families, and friends were sent to the Dayton Convention Center to obtain information. And as you can see on the slide, there were numerous agencies that responded, from the Ohio Crisis Response Team. We had emergency management, Dayton Police, Dayton Fire Department, FBI victim specialists, just to name a few. So all of the leaders of these organizations gathered, and we made a plan and assigned tasks. My staff was assigned the task to work with the coroner to provide death notifications. So on the next slide, you will see that shortly after the event happened, we're dealing with the victims, we're dealing with survivors. We then went on to having special events. Different memorials and tributes started popping up all over, many of which were in the Oregon district. We had flowers, wreaths, cross. People were writing notes on Post-it notes, sticking them on business windows. We also had our first impromptu event, which was held across the street from the Dayton Convention Center. It was an opportunity for the community to try and heal. There was music, there were speakers. Later that evening, and this is still just August 4th now, there was a coordinated event that was organized by city officials. It was held in the Oregon district. So once again, the crisis response team was needed to be there. So imagine just earlier that morning, we had a mass shooting. Now we're going to have a mass gathering of people. So we were all on high alert, but we were there in case anyone became distraught. So that evening, we held our candlelight vigil. The next morning, the Dayton Convention Center officially became the Family Assistance Center. I had to go into my office that morning to tend to other work. Believe it or not, we still had other crimes that were occurring while we were dealing with the mass casualty. But from the moment I got into my office, my phone began ringing. I got calls from funeral homes willing to assist with payment. We had one donor who offered to pay for all of the funeral expenses. I had calls from airlines offering to pay for flights for family members who were coming to town for funerals. We had attorneys willing to help. We had calls from media. We had calls from every government official from city, county, state, and even the national level. I received a call from the White House telling me that the president was coming to town, and we were asked to assist with coordinating victims and meeting with the president. So as you can imagine, there was lots of things that were happening. I spent my afternoon and evenings at the Family Assistance Center helping people as they came in. Another thing that happened, which was really good, is the donations. People wanted to donate items and money. Dayton Foundations immediately set up a repository for people wanting to make financial donations. Our office was asked to help coordinate, to provide oversight, and help with the distribution of the funds. On the next slide, you'll see that even more events began. And I will say, even with all my training with NOVA and Crisis Response Team, I was not prepared for the amount of time and energy that went into helping to coordinate events. So the first, and this is just week one now, we've had the president come to town. I was notified that John Legend, a Dayton native, wanted to provide an event for the victims who were injured. He was having that event though at Blind Bob's, which if you recall, is the location where it was outside where the shooter began shooting people. So it was very distressful for a lot of the victims to come to that. So crisis response team members were asked to be there to assist. And then later on that week, we learned that Dave Chappelle, another Dayton native, wanted to host a benefit for the entire community. It was a wonderful event. There were lots of entertainers that came there. But in the midst of all of that, I also received a call from Lauren Daigle's manager stating she wanted to offer free tickets for a concert she had in town. We also learned that Kanye West decided to come into town to provide a Sunday service for the community. And keep in mind, we're dealing with victims throughout this, through their trauma, through funeral arrangements and everything else they're going through. And we're having to constantly contact them saying, hey, do you want to come to these events? Luckily, all the events went off without a hitch. We had great stars like Chance the Rapper, Stevie Wonder, and of course, Dave Chappelle, who performed. But we were there as crisis response members, trying to keep an eye on everyone because the Gem City Shine, which was held August 25th, there were thousands of people who attended. So on that next slide there, we talk about the next phase, which is the transitional phase. That's when our Family Assistance Center then turned into a Community Resiliency Center. That center was set up in the Oregon district, and it was a smaller scale agency, a place, for people to come who needed some assistance. At this point, it was generally business owners, people who worked in the Oregon district, people who were dealing with emotional distress. And also at this time, crisis response team members were not only there at the Resiliency Center, but they were also available to provide crisis debriefing to business owners and first responders. On that last slide, you'll see some of the different events that we held and some of the recognition we received. That's our mayor up in the corner there. And she was very outspoken about the services that our agency provided to the community. And I think it's important that we accept acknowledgement and recognition, because the work we do is hard. And as was previously stated, 2019 was an extremely difficult year for our community, from the KKK rallies to the tornadoes, to the mass shooting, to having an officer killed in the line of duty. But I am extremely proud of my staff, the hard work and the dedication that they all displayed in facing these challenges. The other important lesson I learned from the mass shooting, that it's so important to not only recognize your staff for their hard work, but to provide a crisis debriefing for the staff. So we actually were fortunate that the Ohio Crisis Response Team came in for our staff and also provided that opportunity for debriefing. You know, working with victims and survivors is a privilege. They allow us to walk with them through that healing journey. For staff, it is frustrating, overwhelming, and tiresome to have to deal with all that's involved in responding to a mass casualty. But the one thing we have to remember, regardless of how stressed we were, does not compare to the anguish that the victims and the survivors must endure. And keep in mind, it was 32 seconds. It caused a lifetime of pain. Thank you. Cindy?
Cindy and Sandy, for sharing all of the effort that an entire community gathered and pulled together to make sure that victims were taken care of, whether it be responding with quick action to pull up different resources for victims, or the philanthropy that was highlighted in the entire Dayton community, and quite frankly, the entire country. If folks have additional questions for Cindy or Sandy, feel free to reach out to the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center. Before we close our show, we have a little something special for the two of you. In addition to what we've heard today, Cindy has also participated as a member of the Rapid Response Team, investigating child abuse cases for the state of Ohio and assisting in development of BCI's response to closed circuit testimony for child victims during a court testimony. Cindy is a co-founder and co-coordinator for the Ohio Crisis Response Team, which, as we've learned today, has responded to numerous state and national events involving adult and child trauma. She has also served as a member of the National Crisis Response Team for NOVA, responding to events such as the Paducah, Kentucky school shooting, the Birmingham, Alabama bombings, and the September 11th terrorist attacks. Cindy is a pioneer in the victims' rights movement. We are honored to present Cindy with the Models of Justice Advocate Leadership Award.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Right, so you can at least hear me, right? First of all, I want to thank you so much. It truly is an honor to be given this award. So I would really like to thank, first of all, the Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center for giving the award to me again and watching this program grow how you have over the years. And thank you all for all that you have done for crime victims. I'd like to, since we're speaking about the crisis response team today, thank the crisis response team co-coordinators, Jeanette and Mark, as well as our team members who drop everything to go and assist in responses, just like we've been talking about today, and just do shifts and man the staff. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank the crime victims over the years, children and adults, who have absolutely, as Sandy had mentioned earlier, provided the opportunity for us to walk and navigate them through the crime victim, through the field, and navigate them through what is some of the most difficult and darkest moments of their lives. And we so are honored to be there, and thank you for trusting us to stand in honor with you. I'd like to also just real quickly thank Sandy for working with you over the years and all that I've done. Thank you for what I've learned at BCI and my colleagues there in the Attorney General's office over the years. I feel like there's a little piece of me because I've learned something from each of you. I want to thank my husband and children for supporting my passion and love for it, and my siblings, family, and friends for also giving me the confidence to continue to do what I do. But the last person I'd like to thank is my darling darling 80-some-year-old mother. It's her birthday today. And she is one of the most incredible, resilient people I've ever seen in my life. So I'd like to end with a quote I've heard her say over the years. When she has reached an uncertain time, or we have, I've heard her say over and over again, remember, tomorrow's a brand new show. So I feel like if we stop and think of that and look at that as the hope that we think of, that we've been talking about with resilience. Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you very much. Thank you all for this honor. I truly appreciate it. Very proud to be receiving it today. Thank you.
Congratulations, Cindy. Director of the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office, Victim Witness Division since 2010, Sandy Hunt has facilitated support groups, managed volunteers, coordinated the Violence Prevention Project, and given numerous presentations to schools and community groups. All of this is in addition to providing supportive services to victims of crime. Last year, Sandy was recognized by the Ohio Crisis Response Team for outstanding community leadership and received the 2019 Dr. Marlene Young Leadership Award from the Ohio Victim Witness Association. As we learned, this past year, Montgomery County faced unprecedented challenges. The community rallied to overcome those challenges. 2020, of course, has presented new challenges, and once again, they must find strength to remain resilient. Sandy is extremely proud of the work done by the advocates in her office and is proud to be part of the Dayton Strong community. We are honored to award Sandy with the Advocate Leadership Award.
Thank you. I am very humbled to receive this award, and I would like to thank the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center, OCRT, and NOVA, and all of the other victim assistance agencies that helped us during the mass casualty. I definitely want to thank my staff for their dedication and resiliency to hang in there, especially after dealing with last year, and this year is definitely challenging too. I would like to thank my boss, Matt Heck, for allowing me the opportunity to be involved in the crisis response team and for his unwavering support and encouragement for us to provide quality victim services. Lastly, I would like to accept this award on behalf of every person who works in victim services. You know, sometimes we're not the ones out front who are receiving recognition, but I want all of you to know that the work we do is worthwhile. And we are worthy and worthy of the recognition. So thank you on behalf of all of us, and thank you for this award.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank all of today's guests, John Walsh, Attorney General Yost, and the Office of the Attorney General. You can watch a replay of this event on the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center YouTube and Facebook page. Thank you.